Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, can I analyze the case of Scott Allen Horn? Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I will put the link to Patreon in the description for this video. First, I'll look at the background of this case, move to the timeline of the crime, then offer my analysis. Scott Horn was born sometime around 1954. He served in the Air Force before becoming a special agent in the FBI. He spent 23 years working there, but toward the end of his career, he had a mundane assignment. He mostly conducted background checks and other non-hazardous work. This was a job that Scott requested in order to have a stable schedule for his family. Scott lived with his wife, Ann Allen, his daughter Kelly, and his son Riley in Laurel, Maryland. This is a town between Baltimore and Washington, D.C. The family lived in a 4-bedroom house. Scott took a great deal of pride in his house and did a lot of work on it himself. For example, he installed a wood-burning stove in the shed outside, which was connected to a system used to heat his house. Scott's wife, Ann, had served in the military and worked as a nurse for her career. Scott retired from the FBI and made a living managing several rental properties he owned in the area. The relationship between Scott and his wife, Ann, was tumultuous and stressful. From 2012 through early 2017, the family was visited by the police at least 15 times. Various types of incidents were reported, like domestic violence and assault. Several protective orders were issued. None of the police contacts resulted in any convictions for any member of the family. In December of 2016, Scott filed for divorce, but he and his wife continued to live in the same house. According to Ann, Scott didn't really talk to her that much. He lived his own life. Scott would regularly go gambling at a nearby casino. It doesn't appear as though he gambled a lot of money, but he was in debt. It's not clear where all the debt came from. It may not have been related to gambling, but it was substantial either way. Scott had charged over $220,000 across 21 different credit cards. Ironically, the numerous domestic violence accusations and the debt are the kind of activities which would have been flagged on an FBI background check. Now moving to the timeline of the crime. Just after midnight on March 16, 2017, 63-year-old Scott Horn made his way home from a casino. At some point, probably not long after arriving home, Scott was murdered next to his house. He was shot in the back of the neck one time and beaten with a blunt object. His body was left in his shed. It had been covered with a tarp and some firewood. Scott's daughter Kelly became concerned about her father that same day because he failed to call her in the morning as he usually did. She called the police, and they conducted a wellness check. They entered Scott's house using a key supplied by his daughter. Kelly entered the house with them. She noticed that the dogs had urinated on the floor. No one had taken them outside as usual. This indicated that Scott had not been there for a while. The police did not find any signs of a struggle. They did not locate Scott's body, even though his body was probably in the shed by that point. The police did not find anyone else in the house. Later, they realized that Ann was probably in the house when they searched it. For some reason, she didn't say anything to the police, even though they were walking around yelling Scott's name after entering the house. The police left Scott's house after performing what had to be the most inefficient wellness check in history. Scott's daughter Kelly and his son Riley continued to be concerned by Scott's absence. A few hours after the failed wellness check, Riley and a friend of his started searching around Scott's house. By this time, it was dark outside. Riley said that he heard movement and what sounded like firewood being thrown around, like pieces of firewood hitting other pieces of firewood. The noise was coming from the side of the house. When Riley investigated, he saw a silhouette of a person dumping objects near the shed. This mystery person entered Scott's house through a back door. Riley was not able to identify the shadowy figure, but believed it was his mother, Ann Allen. He approached the shed and found his father's body under a tarp and under some firewood. He ran to a neighbor's house where his sister Kelly was waiting. Riley told her to call 911. The call was placed at 8:58 p.m. The police arrived on the scene within a few minutes. After investigating, they realized that Scott had been shot in the back of the neck and beaten with an object consistent with a piece of firewood. They did not locate the gun that was used to shoot Scott, and they did not locate whatever was used to beat him. Considering that his body was right next to a wood-burning stove, the police thought that maybe the firewood had been burned. So the killer used this piece of firewood to beat Scott and then simply disposed of the evidence in the wood-burning stove. In addition to the murder weapons not being there, Scott's cell phone and wallet were missing. The police found 62-year-old Ann Allen in the house. They described her as calm. She did not appear to be upset that Scott's body was found in the shed. She indicated that she was home all day and last saw Scott early in the morning. Ann made it seem as though the couple was living separate lives, and she did not have much contact with Scott. Ann was happy to offer up a number of theories about what could have happened to Scott. She mentioned how he had a gambling problem and said that many people were angry with him. Ann indicated that she had been to the shed that day. She had to put firewood in the stove, but she did not see Scott's body. This was difficult to believe considering his body was right in the entrance to the shed. In order to get to the stove, it would be necessary to step over his body. The police discovered that a 42-year-old man named Jason Bird had visited Scott's house that day. They believed that Ann and Jason were lovers, but Ann said that they were just friends. At this point, the police developed a theory of the crime. They thought that Ann shot and beat Scott to death. She then called Jason to remove the gun, Scott's cell phone, and Scott's wallet from the scene. A neighbor took a photograph of Jason walking away from Scott's house that day, but there was nothing in his hands. The police thought that Jason put the items in his pockets. On June 30, 2017, Ann Allen was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, second-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and the use of a handgun in a crime of violence. Ann's friend, or lover, Jason Bird, was also arrested and charged with the same offenses. The police searched Jason's residence and his pickup truck, but they did not find anything connecting him to Scott's murder. The charges against Jason were dropped, but the state decided to proceed with the murder case against Ann Allen. At her trial, the state was not allowed to introduce the evidence about the turbulent relationship between Ann and the murder victim. On November 20, 2018, Ann Allen was found not guilty of all charges. On that same day, she was charged with 2 felony counts of attempting to influence state witnesses and 1 count of obstruction of justice. The police claim that she tried to interfere with her adult children testifying at her murder trial. It's not clear what the outcome of that case was, but one thing is for sure, Ann can never be retried for the murder of Scott Horn due to double jeopardy. Now moving to my analysis. Ann Allen maintains her innocence, and many people believe that she had nothing to do with Scott's murder. The state of Maryland, of course, disagrees. They believe that Ann was the killer. Let's take a look at the case both for and against the idea that Ann was responsible for the murder. Starting with the inculpatory factors. Ann and Scott had a relationship characterized by strife and acrimony. They had numerous contacts with law enforcement in the years preceding Scott's murder. The couple was in the process of getting divorced when he was killed. Scott had complained to the police that Ann had falsely accused him of various offenses. Scott was shot in the back of the neck while standing next to his house. This suggests that Scott either trusted the shooter or the shooter knew Scott's routine well enough to sneak up behind him or to wait for him. The beating component of the murder suggested the motive was personal. The police could not find anyone other than Ann who had a motive to murder Scott. When the police conducted the wellness check, it appears as though Ann was in the house. It seems odd that she would not indicate her presence to the officers. Didn't she find it strange that the police were wandering through her house yelling Scott's name? Wasn't she curious about why they were there? If Anne was there when the murder occurred, why didn't she hear the gunshot or Scott being beaten to death? Or if she did hear those occurrences, why didn't she report them? Anne was calm after being told that a dead body had been found next to the house. Most people would find this news surprising and disturbing, mostly because of the murder part. Anne quickly told the police that people were angry with Scott and he had a gambling problem, almost like she was trying to steer the investigation away from her. The same person who didn't even bother to announce herself to the police during the wellness check was now, all of a sudden, attempting to imitate Sherlock Holmes. Anne's friend, or lover, Jason, visited Scott's house on the day Scott was murdered. Anne sent Jason a text message after this, thanking him for being her muscle man. This makes it appear as though Jason performed some type of service involving force. Anne made it seem as though she and Scott were living separate lives, but she also indicated they were working on their relationship in an effort to reconcile. These two items do not appear to be consistent with one another. Anne told the police that she had been to the shed on the day Scott was murdered, yet somehow she did not see Scott's body. Scott's son Riley spotted a shadowy figure making noise on the side of the house. Even though he could not identify the figure, who else other than Anne would have walked back into the house? Scott's daughter Kelly claimed that on one occasion when she was living with her parents, Anne pulled a gun on her father. The police found wood chips in a washing machine inside Scott's house. The wood chips contained Scott's DNA. This makes it seem like somebody was trying to destroy evidence. If Scott was killed in a robbery gone bad, the killer would not have entered the house and used the washing machine. Moving to the exculpatory factors, Anne did not have a clear motive for murdering Scott. She was not on his life insurance policy and did not benefit financially in any other way from his death. Scott actually had substantial liabilities, over $220,000 in credit card debt. Anne sent Jason Bird a text message thanking him for being her muscle man, but she claimed that she was thanking him for helping her move furniture because she had 2 torn ligaments. If Jason was really there to conceal and remove inculpatory evidence, why would Anne call him a muscle man? That does not require a significant level of physical strength. Maybe concealment man didn't have the same ring to it. As far as Riley seeing a shadowy figure at the side of the house, this could have been Anne putting firewood in the stove. She told the police that she had done that. Anne's physical condition was inconsistent with committing a physically demanding homicide. She was in her early 60s and sometimes walked with a crutch or a cane. There is no evidence that Anne ever purchased a firearm. How would she have obtained the gun used in the murder? Anne did not report hearing the gunshot, but apparently no one else in the neighborhood did either. Anne's DNA was not found on Scott's body. There was no gunshot residue on her clothing. No physical evidence connected her to the homicide. When considering all the evidence in this case, do I think that Anne Allen was involved in Scott Horn's murder? Based on the balance of probability, I believe that she was involved. She had a motive and acted strangely after the homicide. Anne did not need a conspirator to get rid of the gun, the cell phone, and the wallet. She could have simply left the house, dumped those items, and returned. As far as the legal standard, I do not believe Anne was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. The jury made the right decision in this case. Any number of other people could have committed this murder. Now moving to my final thoughts. The state of Maryland should not have charged Anne. Now that she has been acquitted, they can never prosecute her for the murder, even if new evidence becomes available. The case of Scott Horn can be summarized in this way. A former FBI agent with financial failures found himself fixed in the family flat while finalizing a fissure with his feisty female companion. While standing firm next to a fiery furnace, he was ferociously finished off with a firearm and firewood by a foe filled with fury and frustration. The state forced a feeble face-off with his wife, but their feat was futile, and she was freed. Forevermore, the fallen agent will fail to find fairness in this fiasco. Those are my thoughts in the case of Scott Horn. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comment section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be informative. Thanks for watching.